There was not a single combat deployment of the Oreshnik across Ukraine, in the full sense of the word. And to be honest, I'll let you in on a major military and state secret.
Oreshnik's full destructive power, Putin suggests, is still unrealized, and his latest bombshell comments come right on the heels of an explicit nuclear threat. The Russian president has now revealed what he calls Oreshnik's biggest combat secret to reporters. Russia has only used Oreshnik against Ukraine 3 times since it was first deployed. Putin's remarks are fueling speculation that the nuclear-capable Oreshnik could now be positioned as Russia's ultimate weapon in the conflict. At the same time, a key Putin aide has publicly drawn Russia's red lines, warning that nuclear weapons will be used if certain extreme conditions are met. And it is not just about nukes. Moscow now says it is producing new strike systems as President Zelensky escalates the war. Vladimir Putin has stated that Oreshnik has not yet been used in the full sense against Ukraine, implying that its most advanced or heaviest configurations remain unused on the battlefield. On June 4th, during an interaction with reporters, he went further than before, revealing fresh combat information about how and when Oreshnik has actually been employed. He also disclosed that Russia is actively developing new strike systems as the Ukraine war escalates, signaling an ongoing effort to diversify and upgrade Moscow's arsenal.
Yes, Western sponsors supply a large number of drones of various types, including long-range. Unfortunately, some of them break through, but Russia has an anti-aircraft defense system. Yes, we have to improve it. Yes, we have to strengthen it, and we will do it. But Ukraine does not have such a system at all. There are just separate elements, but there is no system. There are Patriot, other systems, which are not enough, but there is no system. There are no strike systems which the Russian Federation has. I mean hypersonic missiles, cruise missiles, and naval, aerial, and ground-based missiles. And there is something else that is the most important. There is patriotism in the will of the Russian people, which is a main condition for us to achieve all the goals and objectives of a special military operation. In the list of issues that I consider important, it would certainly be necessary to mention another circumstance. This is the presence of our own production, resource, scientific and personnel base to solve all the tasks to strengthen the armed forces of the Russian Federation. And this is strengthened every month. And, of course, it is the basis of all those achievements and successes that I have just mentioned. Therefore, to sum up, I would add this. We are, of course, ready and want to negotiate with Ukraine through peaceful means, and on the basis of what we discussed at the meeting with President Trump in Anchorage. And then certain demands were made of Russia, with a view to us being able to make certain compromises. And Russia agrees to these compromises, which we discuss in Anchorage. The Ukrainian side must also agree to these compromises, and the conflict will quickly come to its natural conclusion. As for our new systems, they are being deployed. This applies to Oreshnik as well. This is somewhat different from what we did in the past, before the conflict in the Ukrainian direction. What do I mean? After all, we tested similar systems at firing ranges, but we didn't test the Oreshnik, and that isn't combat use. In fact, there was not a single combat deployment of the Oreshnik across Ukraine, in the full sense of the word. And to be honest, I'll let you in on a major military and state secret. We simply struck where it was convenient to see the results. This applies to the Belaya Tsurkov, and even more so it concerns a DPR area in the perimeter of the main fortified area. Then our drones flew in there, into the shed that we hit, and just looked at how the decomposing blocks were laid. We counted to the millimeter where everything was. For us, it is important to make decisions in the future about the full-fledged use of Oreshnik for the intended purposes, including in the area of urban construction.
Russia, by Putin's own account, first used Oreshnik against Ukraine in November 2024 and then again in January 2026, marking 2 early test cases for the weapon in live combat. The most recent use came on May 23rd to 24th, when Oreshnik strikes were launched against Kyiv, causing massive damage in and around the Ukrainian capital. Putin's revelations land at the same time as a senior Russian minister issues a sinister nuclear threat, tying the future of Oreshnik to Moscow's broader nuclear signaling toward the West. Sergei Ryabkov specifically warned Ukraine and its Western allies against any aggressions toward Russia, hinting that such actions could provoke a catastrophic response. He made these remarks on June 3rd on the sidelines of the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, using an economic showcase to deliver a strategic warning. Sergei Ryabkov said, and I quote, "As regards us, Those hypothetical extreme situations that may trigger the use of these weapons were outlined in detail in Russia's military doctrine and the fundamentals of Russia's state policy on nuclear deterrence. To put it somewhat straightforwardly, these documents send a signal that encroachments on Russia or its territorial integrity by aggressors, including those who may possess such weapons, could prompt us to use these weapons in the worst-case scenario. End quote. His warning came as Ukrainian drones struck both energy and military sites in St. Petersburg on June 3, linking the nuclear rhetoric directly to fresh attacks on Russian soil. The drone strikes landed just hours before Russia's flagship economic forum began, overshadowing the event and exposing vulnerabilities inside a showcase city. Several long-range drones crashed into oil facilities, with loud blasts heard across neighborhoods and plumes of smoke seen rising over the city. The governor of St. Petersburg said the Kirovsky and Krasnoselsky districts were among the areas targeted, confirming that key industrial zones were hit. Ukraine also reportedly struck near the Kronstadt naval base and a shipyard in the wider Leningrad region, extending the attack to critical military infrastructure. Video clips circulating online showed what appeared to be a Ukrainian drone hitting a Russian-guided missile ship, which then caught fire as flames spread across its deck. These strikes took place just about 10 miles from the economic forum venue where Putin is scheduled to speak on June 5, bringing the war perilously close to his stage. This was only the latest attack in a long string of tit-for-tat strikes between Ukraine and Russia, each round pushing both sides closer to a point of no return. The war has claimed more lives after another deadly incident struck Russian-controlled Crimea. Russian authorities said the strike left multiple casualties and triggered an emergency response in Simferopol. The announcement came directly from Crimea's Russian-installed leadership as details of the attack began to emerge. First responders rushed to the scene as officials worked to assess the damage and assist those affected. Sergei Aksyonov said, and I quote, "As a result of an enemy strike on non-residential buildings in Simferopol, 3 people were killed and 7 were wounded, according to preliminary reports. First responders are working on the site." Unquote. Moscow blamed Ukrainian forces for the strike and said non-military locations were among those affected. Ukraine has not responded to the accusations, while independent confirmation of the incident remains unavailable. A Ukrainian drone struck a passenger bus in the city of Yenikievo on June 3, according to initial reports from Russian-installed authorities in the area. The head of the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic said 7 civilians were killed in the strike, underscoring the human toll of attacks along contested front lines. Denis Pushilin added that 11 other passengers on board suffered injuries of varying severity, with some reportedly in critical condition after the explosion and ensuing fire. The bus was traveling on a long-distance route from Moscow to Simferopol in Crimea when it was hit, suggesting the attack occurred on a major transit corridor used by civilians. Videos and images from the scene showed the vehicle almost completely destroyed by the blaze, with only the charred frame and scattered debris left recognizable as a bus. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova condemned the strike, describing it as a deliberate hunt for people and accusing Kyiv of terror tactics against civilians. Russian media outlets alleged that Ukraine had carried out similar attacks on highways before, claiming a pattern of drone or missile strikes on civilian road traffic in Russian-controlled areas. Kyiv, however, has repeatedly denied deliberately targeting civilians during the conflict, insisting that its drone and missile operations are aimed at military or logistical objectives. The incident came one day after large-scale Russian strikes on what Moscow described as military targets inside Ukraine on June 2, in a wider escalation of cross-border attacks. Those Russian strikes left at least 21 people dead and more than 100 injured in Ukraine, according to local authorities there, highlighting how both sides' operations are exacting a heavy civilian price. Kyiv, Dnipro, and Kharkiv were among the cities targeted in a major overnight missile and drone barrage. Officials said the attacks damaged residential areas, commercial properties, and key infrastructure facilities. The city of Dnipro suffered some of the heaviest losses during the latest Russian assault. Missile and drone attacks in Dnipro left multiple people dead and several others wounded. Images emerging from the city showed shattered homes and buildings partially reduced to rubble. Rescue teams remained on the ground, searching damaged structures for possible survivors. The strikes came amid fresh Russian vows to retaliate for the recent attack in Staroselsk. Kyiv faced repeated waves of drone attacks as Russian forces carried out a large-scale overnight assault. Residents spent hours under alert as explosions and air raid sirens rang out across the capital. One residential building sustained major damage after being hit in what officials described as a double-tap strike. The attack triggered multiple fires at business premises, construction areas, and fuel stations across the city. Emergency crews were deployed across Kyiv after the strikes left at least 20 people injured. The latest attacks came just days after President Zelensky warned that Russia was preparing a new large-scale strike against Ukraine. Zelensky said Ukrainian intelligence had detected signs that Moscow was planning another major wave of missile and drone attacks. The Ukrainian president also expressed concern over shortages of air defense systems needed to intercept ballistic missile threats. As the assault unfolded, Poland scrambled its air force along with allied aircraft to safeguard NATO airspace near the conflict zone. The new barrage came only days after Russia launched one of its biggest attacks, firing 90 missiles and 600 drones across Ukraine.